Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we wander into the soft grey hush of a Prague morning in the 1500s, where the rooftops gather mist like folded blankets, and the river moves slowly beneath stone arches that have already seen more stories than you can count. You stand at the edge of waking, not quite part of the city, yet not quite separate either, watching the faint glow of dawn slide gently across red tiles and narrow towers. And just to keep things honest, you probably would not survive this without a bit of luck, a strong stomach, and a willingness to accept that comfort here is more of an occasional guest than a permanent resident. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to share where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always strangely comforting to know who else is awake or half asleep along with you. Now dim the lights. You find yourself standing on uneven stone, the chill of early morning rising faintly through the soles of your shoes. The air carries a delicate blend of damp river scent, distant wood smoke, and something faintly earthy that reminds you this city is very much alive in all its less glamorous ways. Prague does not wake suddenly. It stretches into the day slowly, as if reluctant to leave the quiet protection of night. A thin mist drifts above the rooftops, catching the earliest light. Chimneys begin to whisper small threads of smoke into the sky, each one a sign that someone somewhere has stirred before you. You draw your cloak a little closer, not because the cold is biting, but because it lingers gentle and persistent, like a hand resting on your shoulder. A well-established historical perspective tells us that Prague in the 16th century was one of the most important cities in Central Europe, especially under the rule of the Habsburgs, who turned it into a political and cultural centre. Yet standing here, none of that feels grand or overwhelming. It feels intimate, quiet, almost personal. You take a slow step forward. The streets are not yet crowded. A few figures move through the dimness, their shapes softened by the mist. A woman carries a basket against her hip, her footsteps steady and practiced. A man leads a small cart, its wooden wheels making a soft, rhythmic creak that seems louder than it should in the stillness. You notice how sound behaves differently at this hour. Every small noise travels further. A door opening, a cough from somewhere unseen, the distant splash of water as someone begins their day at the river's edge. It all blends into a kind of quiet music, one that you do not need to understand to appreciate. You pause near a narrow lane, its walls leaning slightly inward as if sharing a private conversation. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth from countless footsteps, each one part of a story that has long since faded into memory. You wonder briefly how many people have stood where you stand now, watching the same slow arrival of morning. There is something comforting in that thought. A curious detail that rarely makes it into the grand narratives is that many residents in cities like Prague kept small animals within their homes, not just for companionship, but for practical reasons. Chickens, for example, were sometimes kept indoors overnight to protect them from theft or predators. It means that somewhere behind these quiet walls, you might find a rooster already awake, entirely unconcerned with the concept of letting anyone else sleep. You almost expect to hear one now. Instead, you hear the soft echo of footsteps approaching. A man passes you, offering a brief nod that feels less like greeting and more like acknowledgement. You are here. He is here. That is enough. His clothing is simple but sturdy, suggesting work that will begin soon and last most of the day. You watch him disappear into the mist. There is a rhythm to this place that you begin to sense, even if you cannot yet fully understand it. It is not rushed, it is not idle, it exists somewhere in between, shaped by necessity, by habit, by the quiet understanding that each day will bring both effort and small moments of rest. Some scholars continue to debate whether mornings like this were considered peaceful by those who lived them, or if that sense of calm is something we project from a distance, softened by time and imagination. For the people here, this hour might simply have been the beginning of another long day, filled with tasks that could not be ignored. You take another breath deeper this time. The air feels different now, slightly warmer. The light has shifted almost imperceptibly enough to reveal more of the city's shape. The rooftops are no longer just shadows. You can see their colours emerging muted reds and browns, each one marked by years of weather and repair. In the distance, a bell begins to ring. It is not loud, not yet, just a steady, measured sound that seems to settle into the space around you. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, marking time in a way that feels both precise and strangely gentle. You turn your head slightly, listening. The bell continues, each note carrying across the rooftops and into the streets, touching corners of the city you cannot see. It is a reminder that even in this quiet, the structures of daily life are already in motion. You begin to walk again, your pace unhurried. The street widens, gradually opening into a space where the mist thins and the light gathers more confidently. You can sense that you are moving towards something more active, though the city is still holding on to its early calm. Your hand brushes lightly against the stone wall beside you. It is cool and slightly damp, its surface uneven beneath your fingertips. You feel the texture, grounding yourself in the physical reality of this place. This is not just a story, it is a world layered with details that reveal themselves slowly if you are willing to notice them. You are. Another cart passes this one, carrying what looks like sacks of grain. The driver adjusts the load with practiced ease, barely glancing up as he continues on his way. There is a sense of familiarity in his movements, as if he has done this so many times that it no longer requires thought. You realise that this is how the city wakes. Not with a sudden rush, but with a series of small, deliberate actions, each person adding their part, each sound joining the growing chorus of the day. The mist continues to lift, and as it does, Prague begins to reveal itself more fully, inviting you to step deeper into its streets, its markets, its quiet corners that hold stories waiting to be noticed. You move forward, carrying with you the calm of this early hour, not knowing exactly where the path will lead, but trusting that it will unfold in its own time. You continue forward as the light strengthens the mist, thinning just enough to reveal the gentle curve of the path ahead. The city is still quiet, but it no longer feels asleep. It feels as though it is watching you now, aware of your presence, inviting you to keep moving. The ground slopes slightly guiding your steps without effort. Soon the narrow street opens and you find yourself approaching a wide stone crossing that stretches over the slow, dark water of the Vltava. Even before you fully step onto it, you can sense its weight, not just in stone, but in memory. You are standing at the edge of Charles Bridge. It rises from the river with a quiet confidence, its towers framing the entrance like patient guardians. The statues that line its sides stand still and solemn, their forms softened by time and weather. In this early light, they seem less like monuments and more like silent observers watching each passer-by with calm indifference. You step onto the bridge. The stones beneath your feet feel smoother here, worn by centuries of footsteps. There is a faint dampness to them, a reminder of the river below and the night that has only just passed. You walk slowly, not out of caution, but because something about this place encourages you to linger. A commonly accepted historical understanding notes that Charles Bridge was completed in the early 15th century and quickly became one of the most important connections between Prague's Old Town and Lesser Town. It carried traders, travellers and royal processions alike. Standing here now, you are part of that long unbroken line of movement. The river flows beneath you with steady calm. You pause near the edge and rest your hand lightly on the stone railing. It is cool, slightly rough, and marked by countless touches over the years. You look down at the water. It reflects the pale sky above, shifting gently, as if it is still deciding what kind of day this will be. A soft breeze moves across the bridge, carrying with it the faint scent of water and distant fires. It brushes against your face, cool and refreshing, waking you a little more fully. You are not alone here. A small group approaches from the opposite side. Two men, their clothing suggesting travel rather than local life, walk side by side, speaking in low voices. Their words blur into a quiet murmur, more rhythm than meaning. Behind them, a woman leads a donkey, carrying bundles secured with rope, the animal's hooves making soft, steady sounds against the stone. You step slightly aside to let them pass. They nod briefly, just as the man in the earlier street did. There is no need for more. On this bridge, at this hour, everyone seems to understand the quiet agreement of shared space. You continue walking. The statues along the bridge draw your attention as you pass them one by one. Their details are softened by time, but their presence remains strong. Some hold symbols you recognise, others seem more mysterious. You wonder who decided their placement, what stories they were meant to tell, and how many people have walked past without truly seeing them. An unusual detail, sometimes mentioned in historical accounts, is that during certain periods, relics or small offerings were believed to bring protection to travellers crossing the bridge. Whether or not this belief was widespread is uncertain, but the idea lingers, adding a subtle layer of meaning to each step you take. You glance at the figures again. There is a sense that they are not just decoration, they are part of the bridge's identity, woven into its purpose as much as the stone itself. Further along the bridge begins to feel more alive. More people are appearing now, emerging from both ends, their movements still calm but more frequent. A man carries tools slung over his shoulder. Another balances a basket filled with something covered in cloth. A pair of young apprentices walk quickly, their conversation slightly louder than the others, their energy less restrained by the early hour. You hear a faint laugh. It catches your attention because it feels almost out of place in the quiet, and yet it is not unwelcome. It reminds you that this city is not just a collection of buildings and routines. It is filled with people, each carrying their own thoughts, their own stories, their own reasons for being here at this moment. You slow your pace again. The middle of the bridge offers a wider view of the city. To one side, you can see the rising shapes of towers and rooftops, now touched by the soft gold of early sunlight. To the other, the river stretches out, reflecting the growing brightness in broken, shimmering patterns. You take a moment to simply stand. The bell you heard earlier rings again, a little stronger now. It echoes across the water, blending with the sounds of footsteps, distant voices, and the occasional creak of wood. The city's rhythm is becoming clearer, more defined. Some historians continue to debate whether Charles Bridge in this period functioned as a place of quiet reflection or primarily as a busy artery of commerce. Standing here now, it feels like both. A place where movement and stillness exist side by side, where you can pause without stepping out of the flow of life. You begin walking again, drawn toward the far tower. The structure grows larger as you approach its archway, framing the street beyond. The shadows beneath it are deeper, cooler, offering a brief return to the softness of earlier moments. As you pass under it, your footsteps echo slightly the sound contained and then released as you emerge on the other side. The city feels different here, not dramatically, but enough that you notice. The streets beyond the bridge seem to carry a different energy, one that hints at the activity waiting ahead. The quiet is still present, but it is thinning, making space for something busier, something more layered. You pause just beyond the tower and turn back for a moment. The bridge stretches behind you now, more clearly visible in the growing light. The figures moving across it appear smaller from this distance, part of a larger pattern that continues whether you are watching or not. You take a slow breath. There's a sense, subtle but undeniable, that you have crossed more than just a river. You have moved from one rhythm into another, from the deep quiet of waking into the early stirrings of a city preparing for the day. Ahead, the streets begin to open. Voices are slightly louder now. The scent of food drifts faintly through the air. Somewhere wood is being arranged, carts positioned, goods unpacked. You cannot see it yet, but you can feel it drawing you forward. The marketplace is waking, and you, without quite realizing it, are already part of its unfolding. You follow the gentle pull of sound and movement, letting the street guide you without resistance. The air feels warmer now, not by much, but enough that you notice the difference against your skin. The light has grown steadier, settling over the buildings in soft layers that reveal more detail with every step. The street widens again, and then almost without warning it opens into a broad space that seems to breathe differently from the narrow lanes behind you. You have arrived in the old town square. For a moment you slow. The space feels vast compared to the streets you have just left. Tall buildings surround the square, their facades painted in muted colours that catch the morning light in uneven ways. Some lean slightly, as though time has gently nudged them out of perfect alignment. Others stand more firmly, their windows reflecting small fragments of the sky. The square is not yet full, but it is no longer quiet. Carts are being positioned along the edges, their wooden frames creaking softly as they settle into place. Merchants move with practiced purpose, unloading goods, adjusting displays, checking their surroundings with quick, attentive glances. There is no rush, but there is no stillness either. Everything feels as though it is just beginning. You step further in. The ground beneath you is broader here, the stones less enclosed by walls, allowing the sound of movement to spread and blend. Voices overlap in low tones, forming a steady murmur that rises and falls like a slow tide. You cannot catch every word, but you do not need to. The meaning is carried as much in the rhythm as in the language. A widely recognised historical understanding tells us that Prague's Old Town Square was one of the central hubs of trade and civic life during the 16th century. Goods from nearby villages and distant regions alike would pass through here, making it a place where different worlds met, even if only briefly. You can feel that now. A man walks past you carrying a bundle of cloth draped over his arm, the fabric brushing lightly against your sleeve as he passes. It is rough to the touch, sturdy, meant for use rather than display. Behind him, another merchant carefully arranges small wooden boxes on a table, each one open just enough to reveal its contents to curious eyes. You notice the smells next. They are faint at first, but they gather strength as the square comes alive. Fresh bread still warm carries a comforting sweetness. Somewhere nearby, onions are being cut, their sharp scent drifting through the air. There's also the ever-present undertone of animals and damp earth, not unpleasant, just honest. You pause near the edge of a stall. A woman is arranging loaves in neat rows, her hands moving with quiet efficiency. She does not look up immediately, her focus fixed on the task. But when she does notice you, she offers a small nod. It is not a greeting in the modern sense. It is acknowledgement again, that shared understanding you are beginning to recognise. You wonder how early she must have risen. The thought lingers only briefly before your attention shifts again. The square is changing even as you stand still. More people are arriving, their footsteps filling the spaces between the carts and stalls. The murmur grows thicker, more layered. A curious detail often overlooked is that market regulations in cities like Prague could be surprisingly strict. Officials sometimes monitored the quality and price of goods, ensuring that merchants did not take unfair advantage of customers. Whether this was always effective is another question entirely, but the intention suggests a city aware of its own complexity. You glance around, half expecting to see someone watching. It would not be difficult to imagine. A figure standing slightly apart, observing, making quiet judgments about weights and measures about fairness and deception. The idea adds a subtle tension to the otherwise calm atmosphere. A bell rings again, louder this time. The sound seems to settle over the square, not stopping the activity but shaping it. Conversations pause for a moment, then resume. Movements adjust slightly as if the city itself is taking note of the passing time. You begin to walk again, moving deeper into the square. A group of traders stands near a cart loaded with sacks. Their conversation is more animated than the others' hands, gesturing voices rising and falling with a rhythm that suggests negotiation. You catch fragments of their exchange numbers perhaps, or quantities, but it slips away before you can piece it together. It does not matter. The feeling is clear enough. Nearby, a young boy carries a small basket weaving carefully through the growing crowd. His steps are quick, but not careless. He knows how to move here, how to adjust his path without hesitation. You watch him for a moment as he disappears between two larger figures swallowed by the movement of the square. There is something reassuring in that. Life here is not chaotic, even as it becomes busier. It has its own order, its own patterns that guide people without the need for constant thought. You begin to sense those patterns even if you cannot yet fully follow them. Some historians continue to debate whether marketplaces like this were primarily spaces of economic exchange or social interaction. Standing here, it feels impossible to separate the two. Every transaction carries a conversation. Every conversation carries a connection, however brief. You stop near the centre of the square. From here you can see more clearly how everything fits together. The stalls form loose lines, creating paths that people follow almost instinctively. The buildings frame the space, their presence steady and watchful. Above it all, the sky has shifted from pale grey to a soft open blue. The morning has fully arrived. You take a slow breath, letting the sounds and smells settle around you. There is a calm beneath the activity, a steady pulse that keeps everything moving without rushing it forward. And as you stand there, surrounded by the early life of the square, you realise that this is only the beginning. The day is still unfolding, and you are moving with it. You drift further into the square, letting the gentle current of people carry you from one stall to the next. The space feels fuller now, not crowded but layered with movement that overlaps without colliding. Each step brings a new detail, a new voice, a new small moment unfolding beside you. A row of stalls stretches ahead, their wooden frames simple yet carefully arranged. Cloth canopies hang loosely overhead, filtering the growing sunlight into soft patches that shift with every passing breeze. Beneath them, goods are laid out in quiet invitation. You pause at the first. Bundles of herbs rest in neat clusters, their leaves still carrying traces of morning dew. The scent rises as you lean slightly closer, earthy and sharp at once. The woman tending the stall lifts one bundle, tying it with a practiced motion, her fingers moving without hesitation. You wonder how many times she has repeated this same action, how deeply it has settled into her muscles. A commonly accepted view among historians is that markets like this were essential not only for trade, but for sustaining daily life, especially in cities where most people did not grow their own food. Everything here has a purpose, even the smallest item. You move on. The next stall offers pottery rows of bowls and cups, arranged with careful spacing. Their surfaces are uneven in a way that feels intentional, shaped by hands rather than machines. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of one piece. It is cool and slightly rough grounding in its simplicity. The potter stands nearby, watching without speaking. His expression is calm, perhaps a little tired, but not unfriendly. There is no urgency in his gaze. He knows his work. He trusts it to speak for itself. Further along the sounds grow more animated. A pair of merchants stands opposite each other. Their conversation sharper now, their gestures more deliberate. You catch fragments again. Prices, quantities, agreements forming and dissolving in the span of a few breaths. Their voices rise, then soften, then rise again, like a tide negotiating its own boundaries. You slow listening. There is no anger here. Not really. Just the steady push and pull of exchange, each side testing the other, searching for a balance that feels fair enough to accept. It is a kind of dance one that repeats countless times across the square. An interesting but lesser known detail suggests that some vendors developed reputations not just for their goods, but for their bargaining style. Certain sellers were known to be firm and unyielding, while others were more flexible, even playful in their negotiations. Over time, regular visitors would learn these patterns, adjusting their approach accordingly. You can almost sense that here. The merchant to your left leans slightly forward, his voice dropping as if sharing something confidential. The man across from him responds with a small shake of his head, though the corners of his mouth hint at amusement. Neither seems in a hurry to conclude. You continue walking. A stall of textiles catches your attention next. Rolls of fabric are stacked in layers, their colours muted but varied. You brush your hand across one piece, feeling the difference between coarse and fine. Each texture tells its own quiet story, shaped by where it was made and who might one day wear it. A woman nearby examines the cloth with careful focus, her fingers pressing lightly, testing its strength. She does not speak immediately. When she does, her voice is low measured. The merchant listens, nodding slowly. Their exchange feels less like negotiation and more like understanding. The square hums around you. The sound has deepened, now no longer just a murmur, but a woven fabric of voices, footsteps, and the occasional sharp call from a seller drawing attention to their goods. It is not overwhelming. It is steady, almost comforting once you settle into it. You notice a man passing with a small wooden tray balanced carefully in his hands. On it, pieces of something freshly baked release a faint sweetness into the air. He moves with purpose, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. You catch a brief glimpse of the food simple and warm before he disappears among the shifting figures. Some researchers continue to discuss whether the variety of goods available in markets like this reflected true abundance, or simply the careful distribution of limited resources. Standing here, it feels like both. There is enough, but not excess. Choice exists, but within quiet boundaries. You step aside to let a cart pass. Its wheels roll slowly over the stone, the sound deeper now beneath the growing noise of the square. The driver guides it with small adjustments, his attention divided between the path ahead and the people around him. There is an unspoken coordination here, each person moving just enough to allow others to pass. You find yourself near a stall filled with small metal objects, tools perhaps, or parts of something larger. Their surfaces catch the light in subtle flashes, reflecting the morning in brief, shifting patterns. The man behind the stall picks one up, turning it in his hand, as if checking for imperfections that only he can see. You wonder how long it took to make. The thought lingers as you watch him place it back among the others, each piece aligned with quiet precision. The square continues to fill. More voices join, more footsteps, more small interactions that overlap without losing their individuality. You begin to recognize faces now not by name, but by presence. The woman with the herbs, the potter, the merchants locked in their gentle contest. You are no longer just observing. You are part of the movement, even if only for a moment. A faint breeze moves through the square, shifting the edges of cloth canopies, carrying scents from one stall to another. It brushes against your face, soft and steady, as if reminding you to stay present to notice. You do. And as you continue through the rows of goods and voices, the marketplace reveals itself not as a single scene, but as a collection of countless small stories, each unfolding quietly alongside the others. You move forward, ready to discover the next. You drift toward the softer edge of the square, where the energy eases just enough for you to notice something else rising through the air. It is not louder than the voices or the footsteps, but it draws your attention more gently. The smell of food. It arrives in layers. Warm bread first, its scent steady and reassuring. Then something richer, perhaps a thin broth or porridge carrying a faint saltiness. There is also the subtle bitterness of ale already being poured somewhere nearby, even at this early hour. You follow it without thinking. A small cluster of people stands near a wooden table set just off the main flow of traffic. It is not quite a stall, not quite a place to sit. More like a pause in the movement of the square where people gather briefly before continuing on. You step closer. A man ladles something from a pot into simple bowls. His movements slow but efficient. Steam rises in soft curls, catching the light as it disappears into the morning air. The liquid inside looks plain, but nourishing. The kind of food that is less about pleasure and more about beginning the day. A broadly accepted historical observation suggests that for many people in cities like Prague, breakfast was a modest affair, often consisting of bread, porridge, or leftovers from the previous day. It was not a moment of indulgence, but a practical necessity. You take a piece of bread offered to you. It is still warm, its surface slightly rough, its inside soft enough to yield easily as you break it. You bring it closer, noticing the faint scent of grain and fire. When you taste it, there is a quiet satisfaction in its simplicity. No sweetness, no elaborate flavour, just something steady and real. You stand among the others. No one lingers too long. Each person eats with a kind of quiet focus, their attention already moving ahead to whatever tasks await them. A woman finishes her bowl and wipes her hands on her apron before stepping back into the flow of the square. A man takes a long drink from a wooden cup, then sets it down with a soft final sound. You notice how little is wasted. Even the smallest crumbs are brushed carefully from the table. The man serving the food moves with an awareness of every portion, every motion measured to ensure nothing is lost unnecessarily. An intriguing and slightly unexpected detail is that ale was often consumed in the morning as well as later in the day. It was usually weaker than what you might imagine, sometimes safer to drink than water, and considered a normal part of daily life rather than a luxury. You glance toward the cups. A young apprentice lifts one, taking a cautious sip before lowering it again. His expression remains unchanged, as if the taste is familiar, even comforting in its predictability. There is no sense of celebration here, just routine. You shift your weight slightly, leaning against the edge of the table. The wood is worn smooth in places marked by years of use. Your fingers trace a shallow groove without thinking, a small detail left behind by countless others who have stood here before you. The sounds of the square continue around you, but they feel slightly distant now, softened by the simple act of eating. It creates a small pocket of stillness, a brief separation from the movement that surrounds you. You take another bite. The warmth lingers, spreading slowly, grounding you in the moment. You realise how different this feels from the idea of meals you are used to. There is no lingering conversation, no extended pause. Just nourishment taken quietly, then carried forward. Some historians continue to explore whether these early meals were moments of community or simply individual necessities carried out in shared spaces. Standing here, it feels like both again. People are together but not necessarily interacting, connected by proximity, not by conversation. You finish the bread. For a moment you remain where you are, watching as others come and go. The man at the pot refills another bowl, his movements unchanged. The rhythm here is steady, almost meditative. A faint laugh breaks through nearby. You turn your head slightly. Two figures stand just beyond the table, their conversation lighter than the others. One gestures with a piece of bread in hand, the motion casual, unguarded. The other responds with a small shake of the head, though there is warmth in the exchange. It is a reminder that even within routine, small moments of ease find their way in. You step away from the table. The shift is subtle, but you feel it immediately. The sounds of the square return more clearly, the movement more present. You are back within the flow, carried once again by the steady current of the morning. As you walk, you notice others eating as they move. A woman takes small bites from a loaf as she navigates between stalls. A man drinks from a cup without breaking his stride, his attention fixed ahead. These moments of nourishment are woven into the day, not set apart from it. You pass another stall where small pastries are arranged in a loose pattern. Their surface catches the light differently, hinting at something slightly richer, perhaps reserved for those who can afford a small indulgence. A child stands nearby, looking at them with quiet intensity, though he does not reach out. You wonder if he will return later. The thought lingers as you continue on. The square feels fuller now, the spaces between people, narrowing, the voices more layered. The morning has moved beyond its earliest stage. It is no longer waking, it is fully alive. You take a slow breath. The scents of food remain with you, but they begin to blend again with everything else. Wood, cloth, animals, stone warmed by light, all of it mixing into something that feels distinctly part of this place. You move forward, leaving behind the brief stillness of the table, carrying its quiet warmth with you. And as you do, the next layer of the city begins to reveal itself. You leave the lingering warmth of bread and broth behind, letting the current of the square carry you toward a different kind of rhythm. The voices shift as you move, less focused on exchange now, and more on instruction, on repetition, on work that requires attention rather than negotiation. The stalls begin to thin. In their place, doorways open into dimmer interiors, spaces that feel more enclosed, more deliberate. You hesitate for a moment at the threshold of one, then step inside. The change is immediate. The air is warmer here, thicker with the scent of wood metal and something faintly burnt. Light enters through a narrow window, cutting across the room in a pale beam that reveals dust drifting slowly in its path. The rest of the space remains in soft shadow, shaped by movement rather than brightness. A man stands at a workbench, his back slightly bent, his hands steady as he shapes something small and precise. He does not look up when you enter. His attention remains fixed on the task, as if even a moment of distraction might undo what he has already done. You move quietly, not wanting to interrupt. The sound of his work is soft but constant, a tool against wood, a slight scrape, a pause, then again. It forms a rhythm that feels almost separate from the noise of the square outside, as though this room exists within its own measure of time. A well-supported historical interpretation holds that guilds played a central role in cities like Prague during the 16th century, organising craftsmen into structured communities that controlled training, quality and trade. Entry into these groups was not simple. It required years of learning patience and often the approval of those already within. You can see that discipline here. Near the back of the room, a younger figure works more slowly, his movements less certain. He watches the older man, from time to time, adjusting his own technique in quiet imitation. There is no direct instruction in this moment, no spoken correction, just observation, repetition, and the gradual shaping of skill. You step closer to the bench. The object taking form beneath the craftsman's hands is still unclear, but its edges are becoming more defined. Each motion refines it slightly, bringing it closer to something complete. You notice how little is wasted. Every cut is measured, every adjustment is deliberate. The craftsman pauses briefly, not to rest, but to examine. He turns the piece in his hand, studying it from different angles, his expression calm but focused. Then, without hesitation, he resumes. An unusual note from lesser-known accounts suggests that apprentices sometimes began their training at a very young age, occasionally living within the household of their master. This created a relationship that was not just professional, but deeply personal, shaping both skill and character over time. You glance again at the younger worker. There is a quiet intensity in his posture, a determination that feels both fragile and strong. He is not just learning a trade. He is learning a way of being one that will define his place in the world. The room feels still, not empty, but contained. Every movement has purpose. Every sound belongs. Even your presence feels like something that must be kept light, careful not to disturb the balance. You step back slightly, letting your hand brush against the edge of a table. The surface is marked with shallow cuts, each one a trace of past work. You run your fingers lightly along them, feeling the history embedded in the wood. It's not something written down. It is something lived, repeated, refined over time. Outside, the sounds of the square continue, but they feel distant now. Here the world is narrower, focused. Some historians continue to discuss how much freedom craftsmen truly had within guild systems. While these organisations provided stability and support, they also imposed strict rules that could limit innovation or movement between trades. It is difficult to say whether this structure felt protective or restrictive to those living within it. You look again at the craftsman. There is no visible frustration in his movements, only concentration. Perhaps for him, this structure is simply the way things are. Not something to question, but something to work within. A faint knock sounds from the doorway. Another figure enters carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The craftsman acknowledges him with a brief glance, then sets his tool down. Their exchange is quite efficient. The bundle is unwrapped, revealing materials that will soon become something else entirely. You watch as the process continues. There is a calm in this transformation. Raw material becoming something shaped, something useful. It does not happen quickly. It does not need to. You take a slow breath. The air tastes faintly of dust and warmth grounding in a different way than the open square. You realise that this too is part of the city's rhythm, not just the visible exchange of goods, but the quieter work that makes those goods possible. After a moment, you step back toward the doorway. The light outside feels brighter now, almost surprising after the dimness within. The sounds return more clearly, the movement more immediate. You pause at the threshold, glancing once more at the figures inside. They have already returned to their work. You step out. The square greets you again with its layered energy, but you carry something different now. A sense of the work beneath the surface, the effort that continues even when it is not seen. You move along the row of buildings, noticing other doorways, other spaces where similar rhythms unfold. Each one holds its own quiet world, its own patterns of movement and sound. You do not enter them all. You simply walk aware now of how much exists beyond what is immediately visible. The city feels deeper, and as you continue, the distant sound of bells begins to rise again, steady and familiar, calling your attention towards something that shapes all of this in ways you are only beginning to understand. You step back into the open space of the square, carrying the quiet rhythm of the workshop with you. For a moment, the contrast feels almost sharp. The voices return the footsteps, the shifting layers of sound that never quite settle into silence. And then above it all, the bells begin. This time they do not arrive gently. They rise in clear measured tones that stretch across the rooftops and spill into every street, every doorway, every small corner of the city. The sound is steady, not hurried, not dramatic, but impossible to ignore. It fills the air without overwhelming it, like a presence that asks for attention without demanding it. You pause where you are. Around you, the square does not stop, but it adjusts. Conversations soften slightly. Movements become just a fraction more deliberate. Some people tilt their heads, listening, without fully breaking from their tasks. Others continue as they were, their familiarity with the sound, allowing it to blend into the background of their day. You look toward the source. The towers rise above the buildings, their shapes now fully visible in the clear morning light. From within them, the bells continue their steady call, marking a moment that feels both ordinary and significant at the same time. A widely accepted understanding among scholars is that church bells in early modern European cities served not only religious purposes, but also practical ones. They marked the hours, signalled important events, and even warned of danger. In a world without personal clocks, these sounds helped organise daily life in ways that were both subtle and essential. You can feel that structure now. The bell does not tell you what to do, but it suggests that something has shifted. That time has moved forward in a way that matters, even if you cannot fully explain why. You begin walking again. The sound follows you, not growing louder or softer, but remaining present like a thread woven through everything else. It reaches into the narrow streets, touches the edges of the market, stalls, lingers in the spaces between voices. You notice how people respond in different ways. A woman pauses briefly, pressing her hands together for a moment before continuing on. A man near a cart removes his hat, holding it still until the final note fades. Nearby, two apprentices barely react at all, their conversation continuing as if the bells are simply part of the air they breathe. You find this variation comforting. There is no single way to respond, no single meaning that must be followed. The sound belongs to everyone, but each person carries it differently. You turn into a side street drawn by the way the bells echo between the buildings. Here the sound changes. It becomes softer, more layered, bouncing gently off stone and wood, creating a kind of quiet resonance that feels almost intimate. The street is narrower, the movement slower. Fewer people pass, and those who do seem less hurried, as if this space exists slightly apart from the main flow of the city. You walk along the edge, your fingers brushing lightly against the wall. The surface is warmer now, touched by the growing light. The texture remains uneven, grounding, familiar, in a way that requires no explanation. You listen as the bells begin to fade, their final notes stretching out before dissolving into the background. An unusual observation found in some accounts suggests that people could often identify specific churches by the sound of their bells alone. Each one carried a slightly different tone, a distinct rhythm that became part of the mental map of the city. You wonder if that is true. If someone standing here could tell you exactly which tower had just spoken, which part of Prague had marked the hour. The thought lingers, adding a quiet layer of depth to what you have just heard. You continue forward. The street opens slightly, revealing a small courtyard tucked between buildings. It is quieter here, the sounds of the square softened by distance. A few figures move through the space, their steps slower, their voices lower. You notice a man seated near a doorway, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He is not working, not moving, simply sitting, listening perhaps, or thinking. The last traces of the bells fade around him, and he exhales softly as if releasing something he had been holding. You pass by without interrupting. There is a stillness here that feels different from the early morning calm you experienced before. That was the stillness of a city not yet awake. This is something else, a pause within the day itself, brief but meaningful. Some historians continue to examine how deeply religious structures influenced daily routines in cities like Prague. While the presence of the church was undeniable, the degree to which individuals internalized these rhythms likely varied widely. For some, the bells may have been a call to reflection, for others simply a familiar signal marking the passage of time. You step out of the courtyard and back into a slightly busier street. The sounds return gradually, voices, footsteps, the distant movement of carts. The city resumes its steady motion, as if the pause never fully happened, and yet something has shifted beneath the surface. You feel it, a subtle awareness of time passing, not in minutes or hours as you might measure it now, but in moments marked by sound, by shared experience, by something larger than any single person. You glance back once more. The courtyard remains quiet, holding its own small piece of the morning. Then you turn forward again, letting your steps carry you onward. The streets ahead promise new layers, new sounds, new spaces waiting to be noticed. And the city, now fully awake, continues to unfold around you. You move away from the open square and its steady pulse, following a narrower street that seems to slip quietly between the larger buildings. The sound of voices fades behind you, not disappearing, but softening into something more distant, like a memory still close enough to recognize. Here the air feels slightly cooler again. The sunlight reaches this space in fragments, slipping between rooftops and catching on uneven walls. It creates shifting patterns on the stone beneath your feet, light and shadow, moving gently as the day continues to rise. You slow your pace without thinking. There is less urgency here, fewer people moving with purpose. Those who do pass by walk more quietly, their attention turned inward rather than outward. A woman carries a small bundle wrapped in cloth, her gaze fixed ahead. A man steps out from a doorway, pausing briefly before choosing his direction, as though deciding which part of the day to enter. You continue forward. The street bends slightly, revealing a row of houses that lean just enough to feel alive. Their walls are marked by time surfaces, uneven colours, softened by years of weather. Windows sit at different heights, some open just a fraction, others closed, but not entirely sealed from the world outside. You notice the details more easily here. A piece of cloth hanging from a line, moving gently in the breeze. A wooden bucket resting beside a door, its surface darkened by use. The faint sound of something being stirred inside one of the homes, slow and steady. A broadly recognised historical perspective suggests that much of daily life in cities like Prague unfolded in these quieter spaces away from the main centres of trade. The grand narratives often focus on markets and politics, but the true rhythm of the city lived in streets like this. You feel that difference. There is no need to move quickly, no pressure to observe everything at once. The city here reveals itself more slowly, offering small details rather than broad scenes. You pause near a narrow passage. It leads into a smaller alley, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The light fades as you step into it, replaced by a cooler shade that carries a faint scent of damp stone. Your footsteps echo slightly, the sound contained by the close walls. You run your fingers along the surface beside you. It is rougher here, less worn by constant passage. The texture shifts beneath your touch, small variations that remind you how these spaces were built, piece by piece, not always with perfect alignment, but with intention. At the end of the alley, it opens into another small space. A courtyard quieter than the last, almost hidden. A few items are arranged without order. A bench, a stack of firewood, a small table with something resting on it, covered by cloth. No one stands here at the moment, but there is a clear sense that this space is lived in, returned to again and again. An interesting and somewhat overlooked detail is that courtyards like these often served as shared spaces for multiple households. They were places for work, for small gatherings, for tasks that required open air but not public attention. Their importance was practical, but also quietly social. You step further in. The ground is uneven patches of dirt between stones that have shifted over time. A faint sound reaches you from one of the surrounding doors. A voice, low and steady, speaking to someone you cannot see. It does not carry far, but it adds to the sense that this space is not empty, only calm. You sit briefly on the edge of the bench. The wood is worn smooth in places, rough in others. You rest your hands against it, feeling the warmth it has gathered from the morning light. For a moment you allow yourself to simply exist here without moving, without observing too closely. The city feels distant again, not gone but softened, as if this courtyard holds a small pocket of stillness within the larger rhythm of the day. Some historians continue to explore how much privacy people truly had in environments like this. With shared spaces and close living quarters, the boundaries between public and private life were often blurred. It is possible that what feels quiet and secluded to you was in reality a place of constant low-level interaction. You listen again. The voice from inside the nearby house continues, joined now by another slightly higher in tone. A response perhaps, or a simple acknowledgement. The exchange is calm, unhurried. You stand. The moment passes naturally, without any clear beginning or end. You step away from the bench, moving toward the opposite side of the courtyard, where another narrow path leads out. As you walk, you notice a small object resting near the wall. It is simple, easily overlooked. A wooden toy perhaps, or part of one. Its edges are worn, its surface marked by use. You pause for a moment, considering it. A reminder that even in these quiet corners, life continues in ways that are easy to miss if you are not paying attention. You leave it where it is. The path leads you back into another narrow street, slightly wider than the last, but still far removed from the open square. The light returns in gentle layers, and with it the faint sounds of the city begin to grow again. You take a slow breath. There is something grounding about these spaces, these hidden corners that exist alongside the busier parts of Prague. They offer a different perspective, one that feels closer, more personal. You continue walking. The street ahead curves, slightly promising another turn, another view, another quiet moment waiting just beyond where you can see. And you follow it, carrying the calm of the courtyard with you as the city unfolds once more. You follow the gentle curve of the street, letting it lead you deeper into the quieter side of the city. The sounds of the square have faded almost completely, now replaced by a softer blend of footsteps, distant voices, and the occasional creak of wood from somewhere just out of sight. The buildings here feel closer, not just in distance, but in presence. Their walls seem to hold more than structure. They carry traces of the lives unfolding inside them. Small hints that reveal themselves if you slow down enough to notice. You do. A doorway stands slightly open ahead, not wide enough to invite, but not closed enough to hide what lies beyond. As you pass, you catch a brief glimpse inside. The room is dim, lit by a narrow window that lets in a thin line of light. It falls across a table where a few simple items are arranged. A bowl, a piece of cloth, something else you cannot quite make out before you move past. It is enough. A broadly accepted understanding among historians suggests that most homes in cities like Prague during this period were modest in size, often serving multiple functions within a single space. Living, eating and working could all take place in the same room, shaped more by necessity than design. You continue walking. Another doorway. This one closed, but you hear movement inside. The faint sound of something being set down, followed by a low voice speaking. The tone is calm, familiar, not a conversation meant for others to hear, but not entirely private either. The line between inside and outside feels thin here. You reach out briefly, letting your fingers brush against the wooden frame of the door. It is worn smooth in places, rough in others, marked by years of use. You imagine the number of hands that have touched it, each one part of a daily rhythm that repeats without needing to be recorded. A window above you opens slightly. A woman leans out just enough to shake a piece of cloth, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. It catches the light for a moment before disappearing. She does not look down at you, her attention already returning inside. You move on. The street widens just a little enough to reveal more of the houses. Some appear more carefully maintained, their walls straighter, their windows aligned with quiet precision. Others lean more noticeably, their surfaces uneven, their edges softened by time. The differences are subtle, but they are there. An interesting detail noted in some historical observations is that wealth within cities was often visible not just in the size of a home, but in its materials and maintenance. A well-kept facade could signal stability, while signs of wear might reflect the constant effort required to keep up with daily demands. You glance at a nearby house. Its door is painted, though the colour has faded. The window frame is intact, the glass slightly uneven but clean. There is a sense of care here, of attention given where it could be afforded. A few steps further, another building tells a different story. The wood is darker, more worn, the edges less defined. The door sits slightly askew, as though it has been adjusted more than once to keep it functional. There is no neglect here, only the quiet reality of limited time and resources. You slow your pace. The street feels more personal now, each house offering a glimpse into a different version of daily life. Not through grand displays, but through small details that reveal themselves without intention. You pass a narrow opening between two buildings. Curiosity draws your gaze, and you see a small interior space where someone is working close to the ground. Their hands move steadily, shaping or repairing something you cannot fully see. The motion is repetitive, focused, almost meditative. You do not stop. There is a sense that this is not a place for observation, at least not for long. You carry the image with you instead, letting it settle alongside everything else you have seen. Some historians continue to discuss how much distinction existed between different social groups within cities like Prague. While clear differences in wealth and status were present, daily life often brought people into close proximity, creating a complex blend of separation and shared experience. You can feel that here. The houses stand side by side, their differences visible but not isolating. The street belongs to everyone who walks it, regardless of what waits behind each door. A faint sound of laughter reaches you. You turn your head slightly and see two figures standing near a corner. Their conversation relaxed, unguarded. One leans against the wall, arms loosely crossed. The other gestures lightly as they speak. The moment feels simple, but it carries a warmth that lingers even after you pass. You continue forward. The street begins to open again, though not into a large space like the square. Just enough to allow more light, more air. The buildings pull back slightly, giving the sense of breathing room. You pause near the edge. From here you can see several doorways at once, each one closed or open in its own way. Each one holding a life you can only partially imagine. The city is no longer just something you move through. It is something layered, something that reveals itself differently depending on where you stand. You take a slow breath. The air carries a mix of scents. Wood cloth, something faintly cooked. Something else you cannot quite place. It is not overwhelming. It is simply present part of the texture of the place. You realise how much of this world exists beyond what can be seen directly. In the quiet movements behind doors, in the voices that do not carry far, in the routines that repeat day after day without drawing attention. You step forward again. The street ahead promises a return to a slightly busier path, the sounds beginning to gather once more. But you carry these glimpses with you, these small windows, into lives that continue, whether you are there to witness them or not. And as you move on, the city feels both larger and closer at the same time. You step out from the quieter street into a broader avenue where the energy gathers again, not suddenly, but with a steady increase that feels almost like a tide returning. The air is warmer now, touched by the full presence of the morning sun. Light settles across the stone in wider patterns, revealing more movement, more intention in every direction. The city has reached its midday rhythm. People pass more frequently, their paths crossing and separating with a kind of unspoken coordination. The sounds rise in layers. Voices speaking with purpose, carts rolling over stone footsteps, quickening just slightly as tasks begin to press forward. You move with them. There is less wandering now, less drifting. Even your own pace adjusts, becoming more aligned with the flow around you. You are no longer an observer at the edge. You are within it, carried along by the shared motion of the day. A line of merchants moves past each, carrying goods, balanced carefully in their arms or across their shoulders. Their expressions are focused, not tense, but attentive in a way that suggests they are measuring time differently now. The calm of morning has given way to something more structured. A well-established consensus among historians points out that midday was often the busiest period for trade in early modern cities, when both locals and travellers were fully active and the exchange of goods reached its peak. It is not difficult to believe as you stand here. You can feel the density of it. A cart passes close beside you, its wheels turning with a deeper sound than before. The driver calls out briefly, not in alarm, but as a gentle warning. People adjust their steps without hesitation, creating space, then closing it again once the cart has passed. You notice how instinctive these movements are. No one stops to think about them. They happen as part of the rhythm learned through repetition, shaped by the simple need to share space without disruption. You pass a group gathered near a stall, their conversation more animated than earlier. Hands move as they speak, gestures, sharper voices rising just enough to carry over the surrounding noise. It is not conflict, but intensity. The kind that comes when decisions matter, when outcomes have weight. You slow for a moment, listening. Fragments reach you, numbers perhaps, or agreements forming. The details slip away, but the feeling remains. This is a moment of exchange that goes beyond the simple act of buying or selling. It is negotiation, trust, calculation, all layered together. An intriguing observation found in some records suggests that marketplaces during peak hours could become centres not just of commerce, but of information. News travelled quickly through crowds, carried by voices that moved from one group to another, sometimes changing slightly with each retelling. You begin to notice it. Snippets of conversation that do not seem directly related to the goods around them. A mention of something happening beyond the city, a name spoken with quiet emphasis, a brief exchange that feels less like trade and more like sharing. It passes quickly, but it lingers in your awareness. You continue walking. The street opens slightly, revealing more stalls, more movement, more layers of activity, overlapping without losing their individual shape. The smells are stronger now as well. Food warming under the sun fabrics, carrying the faint scent of die animals, moving through the space with their own distinct presence. You take a slow breath. It is not overwhelming, it is full, complete in a way that feels almost balanced even as it grows more complex. A figure brushes past you, their shoulder just touching yours. It is brief, unintentional, but it reminds you how close everything is now. The space between people has narrowed, not uncomfortably, but noticeably. You adjust your step, finding a new path through the movement. A group of children runs across the edge of the street, their energy sharper than the adults around them. Their laughter cuts through the layered sound light and quick. They disappear just as quickly, absorbed into a side passage that you barely notice before they are gone. You smile almost without thinking. The moment fades, but it leaves a trace. Some historians continue to explore whether cities like Prague during this period felt overwhelming to those who lived within them, or if the constant movement and noise became so familiar that it simply formed the background of daily life. Standing here, it feels like something in between. Noticeable, but not burdensome. Present, but not intrusive. You pass another stall. This one displays tools, their metal surfaces catching the sunlight in small, sharp reflections. A man examines one closely, turning it in his hand with careful attention. The merchant watches, saying nothing, allowing the object itself to carry the weight of its value. You linger for a moment, then move on. The street continues to shift, each step revealing a slightly different arrangement of people, goods and motion. Nothing remains fixed for long. Even the same stall looks different as new figures approach, as items are moved as conversations begin and end. You realise how alive this space is. Not in a dramatic way, but in a constant, steady sense of change. Every moment carries something slightly new, even if the overall pattern remains familiar. The sun climbs higher. The shadows shorten, pulling closer to the buildings, leaving more of the street exposed to light. The warmth settles more fully now, not intense, but present enough to be felt on your skin. You wipe your hand lightly across your brow, more out of habit than necessity. Around you the city continues. Voices rise and fall. Goods change hands. Paths cross and separate. The rhythm holds steady and unbroken. You take another step forward, and then another. Carried by the midday energy, you move deeper into the life of Prague, aware now that the day has reached its fullest expression and that everything around you is part of a pattern that has repeated countless times before and will continue long after you have passed through. You ease out of the densest part of the crowd, letting the flow carry on without you for a moment. The street widens, then narrows again, and in that transition, you begin to notice something else woven into the movement. Not just trade, not just routine, but a quiet sense of order that shapes how everything unfolds. It is not announced. It does not need to be. You see it in the way people adjust their behaviour when certain figures pass. A man in more structured clothing walks along the edge of the street, his posture upright, his gaze steady but not intrusive. Conversations soften slightly as he moves by, not out of fear, but out of recognition. You slow your pace. He does not stop anyone. He does not raise his voice. Yet his presence carries weight. It suggests a layer beneath the visible rhythm, something that keeps the city from slipping into disorder. A well-grounded interpretation held by many historians is that urban authorities in cities like Prague relied on a combination of formal rules and informal observation to maintain order. Watchmen officials and guild representatives all played roles, though not always in ways that were obvious. You follow at a distance. The man pauses near a stall, exchanging a few quiet words with the merchant. There is no tension in the interaction. It feels routine, almost expected. A glance at the goods, a brief acknowledgement, then he moves on. You notice how the merchant adjusts a few items after he leaves. Not dramatically, just a small shift. A straightening, a repositioning, as though being seen has prompted a subtle correction. You continue walking. Further along you hear a different sound, firmer footsteps, a sharper voice calling out, not in alarm, but with purpose. You turn your head and see another figure, this one more visibly engaged. He gestures toward a cart that has been left slightly out of place, blocking part of the path. The driver responds quickly, adjusting the position without argument. The exchange is brief. No raised voices, no resistance, just a correction made and accepted. An interesting detail, sometimes noted in records from the period, is that fines could be issued for seemingly small infractions, such as obstructing public ways or selling goods of questionable quality. Whether these rules were always enforced consistently is another matter, but their presence shaped behaviour in subtle ways. You can feel that influence. It is not heavy. It does not press down on the city. Instead, it moves through it quietly, guiding actions, setting boundaries that most people follow without needing to be reminded. You pass a corner where two men stand in conversation. Their voices are low, but their expressions suggest something more serious than the usual exchange. One glances briefly toward the street, then lowers his tone further. You cannot hear the words, but you sense a layer of caution, an awareness of being within a shared space. You move on without lingering. The street bends again, revealing a small open area where a few people have gathered. Not a crowd, just a cluster. At its centre, a man speaks with measured clarity, his hands moving in small controlled gestures. You pause at the edge. The others listen, some with arms crossed, others with hands resting at their sides. There is no urgency, but there is a tension. Whatever is being said carries enough importance to hold them there, even as the rest of the city continues around them. A perspective found in some scholarly discussions suggests that public announcements or informal gatherings like this could serve as a way of sharing information in a time before widespread written communication. News decisions and instructions often travelled through their voices rather than documents. You listen for a moment. The words are difficult to catch in full, but you sense their structure. Something being explained, clarified, perhaps even decided. The group begins to disperse. Not all at once. One by one they step away, returning to their paths, carrying whatever they have heard with them. The speaker remains for a moment longer, then turns and walks in the opposite direction. You continue forward. The sense of order remains with you, now more visible than before. Not as something imposed, but as something integrated into the life of the city. It exists in the small adjustments, the quiet acknowledgements, the shared understanding of how things should be. Some historians continue to consider how effective these systems of oversight truly were, especially in a city as active and complex as Prague. It is possible that much of the order came not from enforcement alone, but from habit, from the collective agreement to maintain a certain balance. You find that idea reassuring. The city does not feel controlled, it feels guided. You pass another official, this one standing near a junction where several streets meet. He does not move much, simply watching his presence enough to shape the flow around him. People pass without hesitation, but with a subtle awareness that they are being seen. You meet his gaze briefly. It is neutral, neither welcoming nor dismissive, just present. You move on. The sounds of the city continue to shift as you walk, the midday energy still strong, but now layered with this quieter structure beneath it. It gives the movement a sense of direction even when it seems spontaneous. You take a slow breath. There is a calm in this realization, a sense that even within the complexity, there is something holding everything together. You step forward again, letting the street guide you toward the next unfolding scene, aware now that every part of the city, even its unseen rules, contributes to the rhythm you are moving within. You let the current of the street carry you a little further, but the rhythm begins to change again. The movement softens, not because the day is ending, but because something else is calling people inward, away from the open flow, and into spaces where time seems to settle more slowly. The scent reaches you first. Not sharp or sudden, but warm and layered. Cooked grains, roasted meat, the faint sweetness of something simmering. It drifts through the air in a way that feels inviting without insisting. You follow it. The entrance is easy to miss, a low doorway set between two larger buildings. No grand sign, no announcement. Just a space that seems to draw people in quietly, one by one. You step inside. The light shifts immediately dimmer and softer, shaped by small openings rather than wide exposure. The air is warmer here, carrying the scent more fully now. It settles around you, not heavy but present enough to be felt with each breath. A few tables are scattered through the room, simple and worn, their surfaces marked by years of use. People sit in small groups or alone, their postures relaxed, in a way that feels different from the street outside. Shoulders lower, movements slow. You pause near the doorway, letting your eyes adjust. A man behind a counter lifts a wooden mug, filling it from a barrel with steady precision. The liquid catches the light briefly before settling into the cup. He places it down without ceremony, sliding it across to someone who has already turned their attention back to their companions. A widely accepted observation among historians is that taverns in cities like Prague serve not only as places to eat and drink, but as important social spaces where people could gather rest and exchange information. They were woven into the daily fabric of urban life. You can feel that immediately. This is not a place of urgency. It is a place of pause. You move toward an empty space along the wall and sit. The bench beneath you is firm, the wood slightly uneven but familiar in its texture. You rest your hands against the table, feeling the subtle warmth it has gathered from the room. Around you, conversations unfold in low tones. No one speaks loudly. The sounds overlap gently, creating a steady hum that feels almost like a continuation of the city's rhythm, but softened, contained. You catch fragments, again, small pieces of stories that begin and end without needing your attention. A man at the next table leans forward as he speaks, his hands moving slowly, not to emphasize but to shape his thoughts. Across from him, another listens with quiet focus, nodding occasionally, his mug resting untouched for the moment. You notice how time behaves differently here. No one seems rushed. Even those who will soon return to work take this moment, fully allowing it to exist without interruption. An intriguing detail mentioned in some lesser-known accounts suggests that taverns could vary widely in character, from lively and crowded to calm and subdued, depending on their location and the people who frequented them. This one leans toward quiet, toward reflection, rather than celebration. You appreciate that. A bowl is placed in front of you. You had not asked for it, but the gesture feels natural, expected. The contents are simple. Something warm, lightly steaming, carrying a scent that is both familiar and difficult to define. You take a small portion, tasting it slowly. It is plain but satisfying. You feel the warmth spread steady and grounding, much like the bread you had earlier, but deeper now, more sustained. This is not just the beginning of the day. It is the continuation of it, a moment of rest before movement resumes. You glance around. A figure near the far wall sits alone, his gaze directed toward the small window where light filters in. He does not appear lonely, just still, as if this moment is enough. Another group shares quiet laughter, their voices soft but genuine. It rises briefly, then settles again, leaving behind a trace of warmth that lingers in the air. Some historians continue to explore how taverns balance their roles as places of rest and places of information exchange. While they offered a break from labour, they also functioned as informal centres of communication where news, opinions and ideas moved freely. You begin to notice it. A phrase repeated at one table appears again at another, slightly altered, a detail added or softened. The movement of information is subtle, almost invisible, but it is there, carried through voices that do not need to be loud to be effective. You take another sip from the mug that has appeared beside your bowl. The taste is mild, slightly bitter, but not unpleasant. It feels more like a companion to the meal than a separate experience, something to be taken slowly without focus. You lean back slightly. The bench supports you without comfort or discomfort. It simply exists, allowing you to rest without drawing attention to itself. For a moment you close your eyes, not fully, just enough to soften the edges of the room. The sounds continue. The quiet hum of conversation, the occasional movement of a cup, the faint shift of someone adjusting their seat. You breathe in and out. When you open your eyes again, nothing has changed, and yet you feel different, more settled, more aligned with the pace of the day. You finish the meal. There is no rush to leave, but you sense when it is time. You stand slowly, placing your hand briefly on the table, as if to acknowledge the space the moment it has held for you. You step back towards the doorway. The light outside feels brighter again, the sound sharper, the movement more immediate. You pause just long enough to adjust, then step out into the street. The city greets you once more. But now you carry the quiet of the tavern with you, a softer rhythm beneath the midday flow. And as you continue forward, you begin to notice the voices again, the stories moving through the air, waiting to be heard. You step back into the street with a slower breath, the quiet warmth of the tavern, still resting somewhere beneath your awareness. The light feels stronger now, more settled into the day, and the sounds return with a clarity that feels sharper after the softness you just left behind. The city has not paused for you. It has continued as it always does, carrying voices, movement, and something less visible that begins to catch your attention more clearly now. Not just conversation, but information. The subtle exchange of news stories and speculation that moves through the streets as steadily as any cart or merchant. You walk without urgency. A group stands near the edge of the street, their heads slightly inclined toward one another. Their voices are low, but there is a different quality to them, something more focused than the casual exchanges you have heard before. You slow just enough to catch a fragment, a place name perhaps, a mention of distance, a tone that suggests uncertainty. You continue past, but the feeling lingers. A broadly supported interpretation suggests that in the absence of widespread printed communication, much of what people knew about the world beyond their immediate surroundings came through spoken word. Travellers, traders, and passing visitors all carried pieces of information which would then spread through conversations like these. You begin to notice how it moves, not in a straight line, but in small waves. A phrase spoken in one corner appears again, further along, slightly changed. A detail becomes clearer, or perhaps less certain depending on who carries it. The truth is not fixed, it shifts gently as it travels. You pass a man speaking animatedly to a small circle of listeners. His hands move more than before, shaping his words in the air. The others lean in their expressions, attentive, curious. There is a pull to the moment, something that draws people closer, even if only for a few breaths. You linger at the edge. The man's voice rises just enough for you to catch a clearer sense of what he is saying. Something about a road or a journey, a place beyond the city. His words carry confidence, but also a slight edge, as if he is aware that what he says may not be entirely certain. An intriguing and somewhat lesser known observation is that storytellers and travellers could gain attention and even influence through the way they presented information, not just the information itself. The tone, the pacing, the small details added or emphasised all shaped how the story was received. You can see that now. The listeners respond not only to the content, but to the delivery. A pause holds their attention. A slight change in tone draws them in further. The story becomes more than facts. It becomes an experience. You step away as the group begins to disperse. The moment dissolves quickly, the listeners returning to their paths carrying fragments of what they have heard. You wonder how it will change as it moves through other voices, other interpretations. You continue walking. Another cluster forms near a stall, this one quieter, more contained. Two figures speak closely, their heads inclined, their voices almost hidden within the surrounding noise. You cannot hear them, but you sense the difference. This is not shared openly. This is something more private, more deliberate. You do not stop. There is a rhythm to these exchanges as well. Some are meant to spread. Others are meant to stay small. You pass a woman who pauses briefly to speak to a merchant, their exchange quick but purposeful. A question perhaps, a piece of information passed along. It is over in a moment, but it leaves a trace. You begin to realise how much of the city's life exists in these fleeting interactions. Not recorded, not fixed, but constantly moving, shaping how people understand their world. Some historians continue to examine how reliable such forms of communication were, especially in a time when verification was limited and information could change as it travelled. It is possible that certainty was less important than connection, that the act of sharing mattered as much as the content itself. You find that idea comforting. There is no need for everything to be exact. The city functions within a space where knowledge is fluid, where understanding is built gradually through repeated exchanges. You pass a young apprentice speaking quickly to another. His words come in bursts, his energy sharper than the slower conversations around him. The other listens, then responds with a brief nod, as if acknowledging without fully committing. The exchange ends as quickly as it began. You smile slightly. Even here in the movement of information, personality shapes everything. The street begins to open again, allowing more light to settle across the ground. The sounds shift once more, blending voices with the steady presence of carts and footsteps. You pause near the edge. From here you can see several small groups forming and dissolving, each one a brief centre of attention before giving way to the next. It is not chaotic, it is patterned, though the pattern is difficult to define. You take a slow breath. The air carries the faint echo of words you have heard, though you cannot recall them exactly. They remain as impressions, fragments of stories that continue without you. You step forward again. The city does not hold its stories in one place. It lets them move, carried by those who speak, and those who listen, changing slightly each time they are shared. And as you walk, you become part of that movement too. Not by speaking, but by listening, by noticing, by allowing the quiet flow of voices to pass through your awareness. The day continues, and with it the steady exchange of everything that can be known and everything that can only be imagined. You move on from the shifting currents of conversation, letting the voices fade into a softer background once again. The street carries you into another part of the city, one where the patterns of movement feel different, less clustered, more continuous. Not centered around trade or gathering, but around steady ongoing tasks that do not draw attention to themselves. You begin to notice the presence of women more clearly here, not because they were absent before, but because now their roles become easier to see, unfolding across doorways, windows and small spaces that sit just beyond the main flow of the street. A woman kneels near a low basin, her hands moving through water in slow, practiced motions. Fabric shifts and folds beneath her touch, each movement deliberate, each action part of a rhythm that requires no pause for thought. The sound of water is soft, almost rhythmic, blending with the quiet hum of the street. You slow as you pass. She does not look up immediately. Her attention remains on the task, on the texture of the cloth, the weight of the water. When she does lift her gaze, it is brief, acknowledging your presence without breaking the flow of her work. A widely recognised interpretation suggests that women in early modern cities, like Prague, played essential roles in maintaining households and contributing to local economies, often through tasks that were not formally recorded but deeply necessary. Much of this labour existed in spaces like this, visible but rarely emphasised. You continue walking. Further along, another woman stands in a doorway, speaking to someone inside. Her voice is calm, steady, carrying a tone of familiarity. You cannot hear the words clearly, but you sense the ease in the exchange, the kind that comes from shared routines, repeated over time. A child passes between you, moving quickly but not carelessly. He carries something small held close. his attention fixed ahead. As he disappears around the corner, you catch a glimpse of a woman watching from a nearby window. Her posture still, her gaze following his path for just a moment longer than necessary. You notice the connection, subtle, quiet, but present. An interesting detail found in some historical notes is that women often participated in small-scale trade from their homes, selling items such as food cloth or handmade goods directly from doorways or windows. These exchanges were informal but formed an important part of daily life. You begin to see signs of this. A basket placed just inside a doorway, its contents partially visible. A brief exchange of coins and goods between two figures standing close, their voices low and efficient. The movement is quick, almost hidden, but it repeats in small variations along the street. You pause near one such doorway. A woman hands a small wrapped item to a passerby, their interaction lasting only a few seconds. No extended conversation, no display, just a simple transaction carried out with quiet confidence. You step back, allowing space. The street continues its gentle flow around you, but your attention lingers on these smaller actions, these moments that unfold without drawing the focus of the larger crowd. Some historians continue to explore how much recognition this kind of labour received within the broader structures of society. While essential, it often remained outside formal records, making it more difficult to trace and understand in detail. You feel the weight of that absence, not as something heavy, but as something easily overlooked if you are not paying attention. You walk on. A group of women stands near a corner, their conversation more relaxed than the exchanges you heard earlier in the market. Their voices carry a softer tone, rising and falling, with a rhythm that feels almost like the movement of the day itself. One gestures lightly with her hands, the others responding with small nods or brief laughter. You pass close enough to feel the warmth of the moment, but not close enough to intrude. It lingers as you move away. Further ahead, another figure sits near the edge of the street, mending something with careful attention. A needle moves through fabric in small, precise motions, each stitch placed with quiet focus. The work is slow but steady, as if time itself has adjusted to match the pace of the task. You pause again. There is something calming in watching it. The repetition, the care, the way each small action contributes to something that will continue to be used to be part of daily life. It feels connected to everything else you have seen, even if it exists in a quieter space. You step forward once more. The street begins to shift again, opening slightly, allowing more light to settle across the ground. The sounds grow just a little louder, hinting at a return to a more active part of the city. But you carry these moments with you. The quiet labour, the small exchanges, the presence of lives that move alongside the larger rhythms without needing to stand at the centre of them. You take a slow breath. The air feels warmer now, touched by the steady rise of the day. The scents shift again, blending the familiar with something new, something that suggests the afternoon is beginning to take shape. You continue walking. And as you do, you realise that the city is not defined only by its markets or its grand spaces, but by these quieter patterns, these steady actions that hold everything together without asking to be seen. The street leads you forward, and you follow, aware now of the layers that exist beneath the surface, waiting to be noticed by anyone willing to look closely enough. You continue along the widening street, carrying the quieter rhythms of labour with you. The air has shifted again, warmed by the steady rise of the sun, and the sounds of the city take on a slightly lighter quality, as though something within the day has loosened. It is then that you begin to notice the children more clearly. Not all at once, and not in a single place, but in small scattered moments that reveal themselves as you walk. A pair of voices rises above the steady hum, quick and bright, then disappears again. A sudden movement crosses your path, then vanishes into a narrow space between buildings. You slow. A group of children gathers near the edge of the street, their energy distinct from the measured pace of the adults around them. They move in bursts, stopping and starting their attention shifting quickly from one thing to another. One bends to pick something up from the ground, holding it up as if it carries more importance than it likely does. The others lean in. There is laughter, soft but unmistakable, followed by a brief moment of quiet as they examine whatever has been found. Then the group breaks apart again, each child pulled in a slightly different direction. A well-established scholarly view notes that childhood in early modern Europe was often closely tied to work and responsibility from a young age. Yet moments of play still existed woven into daily routines rather than separated from them. You can see that balance here. One child runs ahead, only to be called back by a voice from a nearby doorway. The tone is not harsh but firm enough to be followed. The child returns, slowing as they approach their earlier energy, settling into something more controlled. You continue walking. Further along, you see a boy carrying a small bundle, his steps careful, his posture slightly more rigid than the others you have seen. His gaze is fixed ahead, focused on reaching a destination rather than exploring the space around him. You wonder how often he carries such things. An intriguing observation from some historical accounts suggests that apprenticeships and early forms of labour could begin in childhood, shaping not only skills but daily habits from an early age. The line between learning and working was often thin if it existed at all. You watch as the boy disappears into a doorway. The moment lingers. Nearby, another group of children moves through a narrow passage, their voices echoing slightly as they go. Their laughter rises and falls, filling the space in a way that feels both lively and fleeting. You catch a glimpse of one turning back briefly, as if checking that the others are still close behind. They are. You follow the sound for a few steps, then let it fade. The street continues to offer small glimpses. A girl sits on a low step, her hands occupied with something you cannot fully see. She works with quiet focus, her movements careful, deliberate. It could be a task given to her or something she has chosen to do. Either way, she approaches it with a seriousness that feels older than her years. You pause for a moment. The contrast between stillness and motion stands out. Some children move quickly, their energy uncontained. Others remain steady, already aligned with the patterns of adult life. Some historians continue to reflect on how childhood was perceived during this period, whether it was understood as a distinct phase of life or simply a transition toward adulthood. The evidence suggests a mixture shaped by necessity as much as by cultural understanding. You take a slow breath. The air carries the faint trace of dust and warmth, softened now by the rhythm of the afternoon. The sounds of the city continue, but the presence of children adds a lighter layer, something that shifts the tone without changing the structure. You walk on. A small object rolls across your path, coming to rest near your foot. You glance down. It is a simple thing, perhaps part of a game worn smooth by use. Before you can consider it further, a child appears, retrieving it with a quick movement and a brief glance in your direction. There is no pause, no apology, just a continuation of motion as natural as breathing. You smile slightly. The moment passes as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind a sense of ease. Further ahead, you see a group gathered near a wall, their attention focused on something you cannot quite see from this distance. You move closer, curious but not intrusive. They are watching one of their own attempt a small task, perhaps a game, perhaps a challenge. The others observe with quiet intensity, their reactions subtle but engaged. When the attempt succeeds, there is a brief burst of sound then a return to calm. You step back. It feels like something you are meant to witness only briefly. The street begins to shift again, the sounds of the city growing slightly more pronounced as the afternoon continues. The children disperse their presence, folding back into the larger rhythm, becoming part of the movement rather than standing apart from it. You continue forward. The warmth of the day settles more fully now, and the light takes on a softer quality, less sharp than before. The shadows stretch slightly, hinting at the slow passage of time. You carry these moments with you. The laughter, the quiet focus, the balance between play and responsibility. They remain subtle but present as you move deeper into the unfolding day. You continue along the street as the afternoon settles more deeply into the city. The warmth lingers in the stone beneath your feet, and the light softens just enough to ease the sharper edges of shadow. The movement around you remains steady, but there is a subtle shift now, something quieter beneath the surface that you begin to sense rather than see. It appears in small ways. A glance held a moment longer than usual, a pause in conversation that feels slightly more deliberate, a doorway closed more firmly than the others. You slow your pace. The city still moves, still breathes, still carries the rhythms you have come to recognize. Yet there is an undercurrent now, something that speaks of uncertainty of things that cannot be fully controlled or predicted. A widely acknowledged interpretation among historians is that cities in the early modern period lived with a constant awareness of illness, especially outbreaks that could spread quickly through dense populations. This awareness did not always dominate daily life, but it was never entirely absent. You feel that quiet presence now. A woman passes you with a cloth held lightly over her mouth and nose. The gesture is subtle, almost habitual, but it draws your attention. She does not appear alarmed, only cautious, as if responding to something known but not spoken aloud. You continue walking. Near a doorway, two figures speak in low tones, their heads inclined toward one another. Their expressions are calm, but there is a weight to their posture, a seriousness that sets this exchange apart from the others you have seen. You do not linger. The sense is clear without needing to hear the words. Further along, you notice a mark on a door. It is faint, easily overlooked, but distinct enough to stand apart from the surrounding surface. You pause briefly, considering it, then move on without fully understanding its meaning. An unusual and somewhat unsettling detail recorded in some accounts is that during times of illness, certain houses could be marked to indicate the presence of sickness within. Whether this practice was consistent or widespread remains uncertain, but the idea alone suggests a visible boundary between those affected and those not. You carry that thought with you. The street feels the same and yet slightly different. The sounds continue, the movement remains, but there is a layer beneath it now, one that does not disrupt the rhythm, but adds a quiet tension to it. You pass a small group gathered near a window. Their voices are low, their movements minimal. One gestures towards something inside, though you cannot see what it is. The others nod their expressions, thoughtful, not fearful, but aware. You take a slow breath. The air still carries the familiar sense of the city. Wood cloth, something faintly cooked. There is no sharpness, no immediate sign of anything wrong, and yet the awareness remains subtle but present. Some historians continue to examine how people in this period understood illness, whether it was seen as a natural occurrence, a spiritual matter, or something shaped by environmental conditions. The answers seem to vary, reflecting a world where knowledge and belief often overlapped. You find yourself wondering what the people around you think. Do they see this as part of life, something to be accepted rather than feared? Or do they carry a quiet unease, a sense that something unseen could move through the city without warning? You continue walking. A man passes you his pace, steady his gaze forward. There is no sign of concern in his expression. Behind him, a woman adjusts the cloth at her shoulders, her movements calm, controlled. Life continues. That is what you notice most. Despite the quiet hints, the subtle gestures, the city does not stop. It does not retreat into silence or stillness. It moves forward, carrying both its routines and its uncertainties together. You reach a slightly wider space where the light gathers more fully. A few people stand apart from one another, their distance not unusual, but more noticeable now that you are aware of it. A conversation begins, then ends quickly, as if the words needed to be spoken but not extended. You stand for a moment. The balance between closeness and caution feels delicate, maintained without being explicitly stated. It exists in small decisions, in the way people choose where to stand, how long to remain, when to move on. You take another breath. The warmth of the day remains, but it feels softer now, as if the city itself is easing into a quieter phase. The sounds begin to lower slightly, not disappearing, but settling into a more measured tone. You continue forward. The street curves gently leading you away from the subtle tension and back toward a space where the light feels more open, more welcoming. The presence you sensed does not vanish, but it recedes, becoming part of the background once again. You carry it with you though, not as something heavy, but as something real, a reminder that beneath the visible rhythms of trade, conversation and daily life, there are always other layers, quieter and less certain, shaping the way people move through their world. And as you walk, the city continues to unfold, holding both its calm and its unease in quiet balance. You move beyond the quieter tension of the street and feel the atmosphere shift once again, this time toward something softer, more open. The light has changed in a way that is difficult to mark precisely. It is still bright, but warmer now, carrying a golden tone that settles across the buildings and lingers on the edges of stone and wood. The day is beginning to lean toward evening. You find yourself drawn back toward the market, though it no longer feels the same as it did earlier. The paths are familiar, but the rhythm has changed. The urgency of midday has eased, replaced by something slower, more reflective. You step into the square. It is still active, but the movement is less dense, more spaced. Stalls remain open, yet the arrangement feels looser now. Goods are still displayed, but not with the same careful precision as before. Some items have been moved, others partially gathered, as if the day's work is gradually folding in on itself. A well-supported historical interpretation suggests that markets often followed the natural rhythm of daylight, growing in intensity through the morning and early afternoon, then slowly diminishing as evening approached. The transition was not sudden but gradual, shaped by both light and habit. You can feel that unfolding now. A merchant stands behind his stall, speaking to a customer in a tone that is quieter than earlier. Their exchange is unhurried, the gestures smaller, the pace more relaxed. There is less pressure to conclude quickly, as if the remaining time allows for a gentler kind of interaction. You walk along the edge. The sounds have softened, voices still rise and fall, but without the sharper edges of negotiation. Laughter appears more easily now, not frequent but present in small bursts that drift through the air and settle gently. You notice the light on the buildings. It touches the upper walls first, then slowly lowers, casting long shadows that stretch across the square. The colours shift with it, deepening, slightly becoming richer without losing their warmth. A small group gathers near a cart, their conversation easy, their posture relaxed. One leans lightly against the wood, Another sits on the edge, their movements no longer guided by urgency, but by comfort. An interesting observation found in some historical reflections is that the end of the market day could serve as a social moment when the pressure of trade eased and people allowed themselves brief periods of rest or conversation before returning home. You can see that here. The exchanges are no longer only about goods. They carry a different tone, one that feels closer to reflection than to transaction. You pause near a stall where the remaining items are being gathered. The merchant moves slowly, not rushing the process. Each object is lifted, considered, then placed into a container or wrapped in cloth. The care remains even as the purpose shifts from display to storage. You watch for a moment. There is a calm in this repetition, a quiet closing of one part of the day. It feels almost ceremonial, though nothing is formally marked. You continue walking. A child appears again, this time moving more slowly. Their earlier energy softened by the passing hours. They carry something small, perhaps purchased or given, holding it close as they walk beside an adult. The connection feels steady. You notice how the square holds both movement and stillness now. Some people continue to pass through their paths direct and purposeful. Others linger their steps, slower, their attention less fixed. Some historians continue to consider how these transitional hours were experienced, whether they were seen as part of work or as the beginning of rest. The distinction may not have been clearly defined, existing instead as a gradual shift rather than a clear boundary. You take a slow breath. The air carries a different blend of scents now, less sharp, more settled. The warmth of food has softened the presence of the day's activity, easing into something quieter. You move towards the centre of the square. From here you can see how the space has changed. The earlier density has given way to openness. The patterns of movement are still there, but they feel less fixed, more fluid. A man walks past carrying a bundle, his pace unhurried. Behind him, a woman pauses to adjust something in a basket, her movements calm, deliberate. You stand for a moment. The city feels as though it is exhaling, not stopping, not ending, but releasing the intensity of the earlier hours, allowing the rhythm to soften without losing its continuity. You begin to walk again. The light continues to shift the shadows, lengthening further the edges of the day, becoming more defined. The square holds its final exchanges, its last moments of activity before the next phase begins. You carry the calm with you, the memory of the morning's energy, the midday intensity, and now this gentle easing, all layered together in a way that feels complete. And as you move toward the edge of the square once more, the city prepares quietly for the arrival of evening, its pace slowing, its tone softening its presence, settling into something more intimate. You leave the square as it settles into its softer rhythm, stepping once more into the narrower streets, where the light now stretches long and low. The warmth of the day lingers, but it begins to thin, replaced gradually by a cooler edge that slips in almost unnoticed. The city is changing again, not in a single moment, but in a slow, careful transition that touches everything at once. The voices grow quieter, not silent, but less layered. The movement becomes more deliberate, each step carrying a clearer sense of destination. You walk along the edge of the street, watching as small details begin to shift. A door closes with a soft final sound. A window is drawn inward, the light within dimming slightly as something is placed between it and the outside world. A cart passes its load lighter now, its journey nearing completion. The sky above deepens. The blue becomes richer, more settled as the last traces of the day's brightness begin to fade. The rooftops catch this change first, their edges outlined briefly before blending into the growing dusk. A widely recognised historical understanding suggests that before widespread street lighting, cities like Prague would become significantly darker after sunset, with only limited sources of illumination such as candles, lanterns, and occasional torches. You begin to notice those lights appearing now. A small flame flickers in a window, its glow warm and contained. Further along, another light emerges, then another, each one marking a point of presence within the darkening city. You continue walking. The street narrows again, and the light becomes more fragmented. Shadows stretch and merge, creating spaces that feel deeper, quieter. The sounds follow suit, softening into a gentle background that no longer competes for your attention. You hear footsteps behind you, then beside you, then ahead. Each one distinct, yet part of a shared rhythm that continues even as the day fades. A figure passes, carrying a lantern, its light moving with them, casting brief shifting shapes against the walls. You watch it go. An interesting detail found in some accounts is that night watchmen often patrolled the streets after dark, carrying lanterns and marking the hours with calls. Their presence served both practical and symbolic purposes, offering a sense of order within the uncertainty of the night. You listen carefully, for now there is no call, only the quiet movement of those returning home or continuing their tasks in a slower, more measured way. You turn a corner. The street opens slightly, revealing a small cluster of buildings, where the lights are more concentrated. A doorway stands open, and from within a soft glow spills onto the ground, creating a warm patch in the coolness of the evening. You pause at the edge. Voices drift out low and steady, not the lively tones of earlier, but something more subdued. Conversations that seem to belong to the end of the day, carrying the weight of what has already happened rather than the anticipation of what is to come. You do not enter. Instead, you continue on, letting the light guide you from one space to the next. Some historians continue to examine how people experienced nighttime in early modern cities, whether it was seen as a time of rest, danger, or quiet reflection. The answer likely varied, shaped by personal circumstance as much as by broader conditions. You feel a mix of all three. There is calm in the slower pace, in the softening of sound and movement. There is also a subtle awareness of the unknown, of spaces that are less visible, less defined. You walk more carefully now, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Your steps adjust to the dimmer light, your attention sharpening in small ways. The ground beneath you feels more present. The textures more noticeable as you rely less on sight and more on sensation. A breeze moves through the street. It carries a cooler touch, brushing lightly against your face and hands. The scents of the day have faded, replaced by something quieter, less defined. The city at night does not announce itself through smell as strongly. It becomes more about sound, about presence. You hear a door open somewhere behind you, then close again. The sound echoes slightly, then disappears into the stillness. You continue forward. The lights become more scattered now, each one standing alone against the growing darkness. They do not illuminate the entire street, only small portions of it, leaving the rest in shadow. You pass beneath one. For a moment your path is clear, the ground visible, the walls defined. Then you move beyond it, and the darkness returns softer than before, but present enough to be felt. You take a slow breath. The city feels more intimate, now its scale reduced by the limits of light. The grand spaces have given way to smaller, more contained experiences. Each step carries you through a world that reveals itself only in pieces. You continue walking, and as you do, the sounds of the day settle further into the background, replaced by the quiet presence of evening, steady and calm, guiding you gently toward the deeper stillness of night. You continue through the dimming streets, your steps slower now, more attuned to the softened rhythm of the evening. The city has not fallen silent, but it has changed its voice. What was once layered and busy now feels quieter, more contained, as if each sound has been gently wrapped in the growing darkness. Ahead, a familiar warmth draws your attention again. Not the open invitation of the market, but something more enclosed, more intimate. A doorway stands partially open, and from within a steady glow spills outward, catching the edges of the stone and pulling softly at your feet. You pause, then step inside. The air is warmer here, carrying the familiar scent of alewood and food that has long since been prepared and now lingers in the background. The light is low-shaped by candles placed carefully along tables and walls. Their flames move slightly, responding to the smallest shifts in air. The room feels different from before. Earlier it held the quiet pause of midday. Now it carries the calm weight of evening. People sit closer together, their voices lower, their movements slower. The energy has settled into something reflective, as if the day is being quietly considered rather than actively lived. You find a place along the wall and sit. The bench welcomes you with the same firm familiarity, the wood worn smooth where others have rested before. You place your hands on the table, feeling its steady presence beneath your fingertips. Around you conversations unfold. Not hurried, not animated, but thoughtful. A man speaks softly, his words measured as though choosing each one with care. Across from him, another listens without interruption, his attention steady, his expression calm. You notice the pauses. They are longer now, more comfortable. Silence is not something to be filled quickly. It is allowed to exist, to settle between words without discomfort. A widely accepted scholarly perspective suggests that taverns, in the evening, often served as spaces for reflection and storytelling where the experiences of the day could be shared, reshaped and understood in quieter ways. You can feel that here. The voices carry not just information, but memory. Small events retold, slightly adjusted, give a new meaning through the act of sharing. An unusual detail, sometimes mentioned in historical descriptions, is that certain taverns developed reputations for particular kinds of conversation. Some were known for lively debate, others for quiet companionship. The character of the space often reflected the people who returned to it again and again. This one leans toward stillness. You take a slow sip from the mug placed before you. The taste is familiar, now mild and steady, something that does not demand attention, but supports it. You let it rest on your tongue for a moment before swallowing, feeling the warmth settle gently. You glance toward the far side of the room. A small group sits together, their heads inclined slightly inward. One speaks, the others listening with quiet focus. A brief smile passes between them, then fades into a more thoughtful expression. You wonder what they are sharing. The details are not yours to know, but the feeling reaches you nonetheless. A sense of connection, of shared understanding that does not need to be spoken loudly to be felt. Some historians continue to consider how these evening gatherings shaped community life, whether they served primarily as social bonds or as spaces where ideas and perspectives were quietly exchanged and refined. You sense that it is both. The room holds more than conversation. It holds presence, a kind of quiet companionship that does not rely on constant interaction. You lean back slightly. The candlelight shifts as someone moves nearby, casting brief shadows that stretch and then settle again. The room feels enclosed in the best way, held together by warmth and shared stillness. A door opens briefly. Cool air slips in, carrying a hint of the night outside. It brushes against your face, then disappears as the door closes again, leaving the warmth intact. You breathe in slowly. The scent of wood, of cloth, of something faintly sweet lingers. It is not strong, but it is enough to anchor you in the moment. You close your eyes for a moment, not fully, just enough to soften the edges of the room, to let the sounds blend into a gentle hum. Voices, movement, the quiet shift of someone adjusting their seat. It all becomes part of a single steady rhythm. When you open your eyes again, nothing has changed. And yet the moment feels deeper. You finish your drink slowly, without hurry. There's no need to leave immediately, but you sense the natural flow of the evening, the way people begin to rise, one by one, not in a coordinated way, but in a gradual unfolding. You stand. Your hand rests briefly on the table, a small acknowledgement of the space that has held you. Then you turn toward the doorway. The night greets you once more. Cooler now, quieter, the lights fewer, but more defined against the darkness. The street feels different than it did before, more settled, more contained. You take a step forward, carrying with you the quiet voices, the steady warmth, the sense of reflection that lingers even as you move back into the open air. And as you continue, the city prepares for its final stillness, each step drawing you closer to the calm that waits at the end of the day. You step back into the night, the tavern's warmth fading gently behind you as the cooler air settles around your shoulders. The street is quieter now, not empty but softened in a way that feels almost protective. The city has not disappeared, it has simply drawn inward. Your footsteps sound clearer. Each one touches the stone with a quiet certainty echoing slightly in the spaces where earlier noise has fallen away. The lights that remain are few but steady, a candle in a window, a lantern carried slowly by someone moving ahead of you. Each glow defines a small circle of presence in the surrounding dark. You walk without urgency. There is no need to move quickly now. The day has unfolded, completed its rhythm, and released you into this final, quieter phase. The streets guide you gently familiar now, in a way they were not before. A careful reading of historical life in cities like Prague suggests that night brought a noticeable shift in behaviour. Many people withdrew indoors while those who remained outside moved with greater awareness, their actions shaped by the reduced light and the slower pace of the hour. You feel that awareness in yourself. Your senses adjust. The ground beneath your feet becomes more important. The sounds around you carry more meaning. A door closing somewhere ahead. The faint murmur of voices behind a wall. The distant movement of someone passing through another street. You follow the curve of the path. The buildings seem taller now, their upper edges disappearing into the darkness above. The sky, once bright and open, has deepened into a quiet expanse, where only a few faint points of light begin to appear. You pause briefly. A small courtyard opens to your side, one you might have passed without noticing earlier. Now it feels different, still, almost suspended. The objects within it are barely visible shapes rather than details, but their presence is enough. You step in. The air feels cooler here, untouched by the small currents of the street. You move slowly, your hand brushing lightly against the wall as you pass. The texture grounds you steady and real. You sit on a low bench. For a moment you do nothing. The city is still there beyond the walls, but it feels distant now, softened by space and time. The sounds that reach you are faint, carried lightly, as though they no longer need to announce themselves. An intriguing observation from historical reflections is that nighttime in early cities often created a different kind of awareness, one that was shaped more by listening and feeling than by sight. The world did not vanish, it simply revealed itself in other ways. You close your eyes. Not completely, just enough to let the darkness settle more fully around you. The air moves gently. A breeze, almost imperceptible, passes through the courtyard, brushing against your face. You breathe in slowly and out. Some historians continue to reflect on whether nights like this were experienced as peaceful or uncertain, shaped by both the comfort of rest and the limits of visibility. Perhaps it was not one or the other, but a balance between the two, held quietly in each moment. You remain where you are. The bench beneath you holds its quiet warmth. The wall at your back feels steady. The ground beneath your feet no longer demands attention. Everything has softened into something simpler. You let your thoughts slow. There is no need to follow them, no need to hold on to any single idea. They move as the day has moved, gradually, gently, without urgency. The city rests, not entirely, not completely, but enough that its presence feels calm rather than active. The layers you have moved through remain, but they have settled into the background, forming a quiet foundation beneath the stillness. You open your eyes slightly. The shapes around you are dim but familiar. The courtyard, the walls, the narrow opening that leads back to the street. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels more distant, as though the day itself has stepped back. You stand slowly. Your movements are unhurried, guided more by feeling than by thought. You take a final look at the space, not to memorize it, but simply to acknowledge it. Then you step back toward the street. The night welcomes you again, calm and steady. The path ahead is quiet, lit only in small fragments, but it feels clear enough. You walk. Each step carries you further into the stillness, away from the movement of the day, and towards something softer, something that asks nothing of you. The sounds fade even more. The lights grow fewer. The city which once surrounded you with its energy and detail now holds you gently within its quiet. And as you continue, your steps slow naturally, your breath steady, your awareness softening with each passing moment. You no longer need to observe. You simply exist within it. The night deepens. The final traces of the day settle completely, leaving only the calm presence of Prague resting beneath the darkened sky. You find a place to rest, and as you do, the city fades into a gentle stillness, its sounds dissolving into quiet, its light softening into shadow, its rhythm slowing to match your own. You breathe in and out and let everything drift. The streets, the voices, the warmth of the tavern, the sound of bells, all of it easing into the distance, leaving you in a space that feels safe, calm, and ready for rest. Now as the night settles fully around you, you allow your thoughts to slow even further. The images of the day no longer move quickly. They drift one into the next, soft and unhurried. The market, the quiet streets, the gentle sounds of work and conversation all blend into something distant and peaceful. You do not need to follow them. You simply let them pass. The air feels still now, carrying only the faintest hint of movement. Your breathing becomes the clearest rhythm, steady and calm, rising and falling without effort. There is nothing left to do, no path to follow, no sound to interpret, only the quiet presence of the moment holding you gently as the city rests alongside you. Your body relaxes, your thoughts soften, and the world around you fades into a calm, steady silence that feels both distant and close at the same time. You are safe here, you are still, and as the final traces of Prague drift away, you allow yourself to rest completely, carried gently into sleep by the quiet rhythm of the night. Sweet dreams.